The next question is, if two people go out to dinner tomorrow night on Friday night, and they each order fish from the menu, and they drive home, they think they had a nice night, they're nice people, they didn't hurt anyone, they want the environment to be good. What are they not understanding? What just happened? The people, one had their fish from a fish farm, one was caught from the ocean. Seems pretty gentle, everyone seems to think it's okay. What impact did their fish have on natural resources, the environment, everything?
Well, it's kind of general because there's no universal thing here. But I'll say with fish specifically, let me touch on this. This may be a hot button or a hot topic for some people in the room. I don't know. So the problems with wild fish are, some people may have different perspectives on the health impact, but I'll say from an environmental standpoint, since that's where you're addressing right now, the problem with wild fish is we are massacring the oceans. We are strip mining them. And the stocks of wild fish are being ravaged. In many cases, there are 10% of what there were 50 years ago in our oceans. So we're decimating them, and we're polluting our oceans with trash, by the way. And so even some of the fish that are left are eating that trash. They're getting plastic in their bellies, and they're starving to death because they can't digest it. And they can't digest other food because their stomachs are filled with plastic. So this is a serious problem, and our oceans are not in good shape. And so just to say that wild fish overfishing is a big issue, and the tuna industry in particular, as sushi has grown more popular, is having major impact because in order to catch those big fish, they end up catching a lot of smaller fish, the so-called bycatch. And that's thrown away or turned into fish meal for fish farms. And so we're for every one fish that we consider desirable, a lot of other fish are getting caught and killed that we may not consider so desirable. And then fish farms are an environmental disaster because it takes 5 pounds of fish to make 1 pound of fish. Sound familiar? They're feeding them fish from the oceans and some of the bycatch and other stuff, and they're in such close quarters that they have to be given antibiotics to keep them alive because disease would spread rampantly. They are massively polluted. They're swimming in water that's full of fish feces, and so it's very contaminated. And while our farmed salmon has to have a pink dye put in there to make it that salmon color, because otherwise it would be gray because they're not eating their natural diet. So, and farmed fish is very high and even higher, much higher in PCBs and heavy metals and mercury even than the wild fish are. So those are significant environmental concerns. I will say that purely from a health standpoint, I think that there are a very small portion of the fish out there that can be high in omega-3s and low in mercury, and that may, according to a lot of the studies that I've seen, be associated with positive health benefits, although that's often in comparison to maybe people are replacing beef with it, for example. And so you always have to look at what the alternatives and options are. And a great source of omega-3 fatty acids can also be coming from algae if you take a supplement and get your DHA and EPA that way if you don't want to participate in the fish industry.
Well, I appreciate your oceanic view. Little pun, but and it's really good. And again, make it simple. In the Pacific Ocean, all the fish are radioactive at this point. That's a really big issue because Pacific Ocean is pretty big. So all that's caught. I mentioned from a diabetes prevention point of view, fish fat is specifically toxic to the beta cells of the pancreas that makes insulin. Another little issue. I cut it cross in my effort to make it simple for people. Go organic. There's nothing about fish anymore that's organic. They're very high in pesticides, herbicides, and so forth because we've so polluted the oceans that it's not really safe. Period. Wherever you are, and if it's Pacific, I said worse. So that kind of solves the question in a way. It's like, hey, this is not good. besides the fact of the total destruction that's going on. So the other thing is that, this is a new piece of information, that the fish oil, where the EPA and DHA are, seems to raise the blood sugar. New piece of data, which is like, oh no. So there is available to get your DHA and EPA from the yellow algae, and there's a few companies out. There's actually one here that I have to look at. So it's like, we can get everything we need without eating fish. Done. And that would allow to regenerate. But we have to protect the oceans, or it's still dangerous to eat fish. So we need to put some, deplasticize the oceans and obviously the fish in that way. So that's how we can make it simple. Just stop eating it because it's not good, and that makes people rethink the whole story, and it protects and helps regenerate the whole ocean ecology. That's how I would look at it. It's a simple approach,
So I'm going to bring the biotech perspective in here, and I want to share with you one of the ways that they try and deceive. They'll look at any problem and say, oh, there's a biotech solution, and this is the way. So anything that comes up, whether it's drought or climate change or fish problems. In fact, one of the problems with livestock is that they have to separate the offspring from the mother, and that will make the mother sad, and so they want to genetically engineer out the mothering instinct of livestock. Seriously. Now, with fish, they'll tell you, okay, so you have to, for salmon, for example, it'll take you 3 years to get to market, and so you have to use all that environmental impact. Use a genetically engineered salmon, and it's outfitted with genes from another salmon and from an Arctic eel, which causes the salmon to produce a growth factor throughout the year, because usually it shuts down during part of the year, but it'll go throughout the year. So in 18 months, it can go to market instead of 3 years. Won't that be good for the environment? Well, the salmon is being sold in Canada. It is being consumed, sold in restaurants and by caterers, unlabeled. Not in the United States yet. Now, they did a study in Canada for a related genetically engineered salmon, not the same one from Aqua Bounty, but one that was created in an academic laboratory. And they put this ravenous, imagine growing that fast, you have to eat a lot, right? So these are ravenously hungry salmon. They put them in tanks with just the frankenfish or with the regular salmon as well. And when they put enough food in there, it was no problem. When they reduced the amount of food, the frankenfish freaked. They became cannibalistic and aggressive. They attacked and ate other fish, and they moved into different parts of this tank that was to symbolize or represent what the oceans were like. And what they realized is they created this aggressive gang of mutant fish, and within the tanks, there was either complete extinction or a population crash to just a few left. Now, there are hundreds of thousands of fish that escape fish farms every year. The fences break. And this Aqua Bounty says, oh no, we're going to grow our fish in tanks inside Panama. And we're going to grow the eggs in Prince Edward Island in Canada and ship them down. Well, now they're thinking, now, that was what they said. Now all of a sudden, there's interest around the world in this frankenfish, and it may actually be released sooner than later into these ocean fenced-in areas. Now imagine if they have the quality of this Canadian experiment, and they grow faster also, so the mating, the females, for example, may have a preference for the bigger frankenfish than the natural. So they may have a survival advantage, and they may wipe out natural salmon as a result, and they may, in the reduction of ocean fish, their hunger may be unsatiated, and they may become the roving gang members of the ocean created in laboratories in the United States and in Canada. So this is, and if you eat it, the number of fish that were used to test the safety was so small that a 25% increase or a 50% increase in things that were pretty serious, like allergic reactions or a cancer-related hormone, were considered statistically insignificant. And rather than sending it back and saying, hey, before you feed this to millions of people, do a real study, they didn't. So you may end up, it may create cancer, and there's plenty of evidence that it could, and it may create additional allergic reactions. So I would say stay away from the genetically engineered solutions to all problems.
I think the thing you said, just a comment, is you eat it in Canada, you don't know if it's GMO engineered or not. So that brings us again saying, we're not going to eat your food because we can't trust it. Changes the story. Yeah. It's a very, very important little principle. Just go organic. If you can't get organic, forget it. That will change the whole what we get, because we do have power.
One other note of caution for wild salmon eaters. A study recently found that 60+% of the salmon sold in restaurants, including many upscale restaurants, that was sold as wild was actually farmed. There's no regulation on this point. You just take the restaurant's word for it, and obviously it attracts a premium price. And we may soon recognize that farmed could also mean genetically engineered if that comes onto the marketplace here, although it hasn't yet. I don't know that that's the case for salmon that's sold like in stores, but that is the case in restaurants.
So I have a question on the statistic, Ocean.
Yeah.
Is it 60% of all salmon, including those that were sold as wild, or is it 60% of the wild salmon?
Of the wild. This isn't a super comprehensive study. This was, they tested like 10 restaurants.
60%.
Nationwide. Like
60% of those that claimed to be wild turned out to be
That's right.
domestic.
That's right. Farmed.
Farmed.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Shocking.
So,
Well, again, the principle holds. If you can't trust it, don't buy it. And there'll have to be a level of integrity. Keep it simple.